In this last video in this module, we're going to look at a little bit of an empiricist epistemology, an alternative to Descartes' theory of knowledge, and we'll be looking at the epistemology of John Locke. John Locke was a philosopher who slightly younger than Descartes, 1632 to 1704, in Britain. He was an empiricist, and meaning that he thought that the central source of knowledge is the senses, and that reason by itself provides little or no knowledge. Locke believes that that we do in fact have knowledge of things other than ourselves, in particular of physical objects, and that knowledge comes from the senses without any important supplementation from reason. For Descartes, remember, reason comes in and plays a critical role. For Locke, it's not going to. So we'll see how that works out, right? Locke so then disagrees with Descartes, both in what I just said, it's the senses alone providing knowledge, not the senses plus reason, and also he thinks that reason by itself provides little or no knowledge. And so whereas for Descartes, God has implanted ideas in us, those are the innate ideas, Locke does not believe that. And so the key claim we'll be looking at is just Locke's view that perception gives us knowledge of the existence of other objects other than what? Ourselves or God. So everything else. And in particular, like, this and your computer and everything else. So he has a couple of arguments in our reading, the short reading that we did. One is that he thinks that the senses are the best and only judge of the existence of other things. And he thinks that if the senses are the best and only judge of the existence of other things, we should trust the senses. And they do provide knowledge, and so we should trust the senses, and the senses do provide knowledge. Where else are we going to turn, after all? Descartes wouldn't agree with the first premise because he would think that the senses, that reason can provide us with knowledge even of the existence of some things, but he would also, and for our purposes, let's focus on Descartes' disagreement with the second premise. Even if the senses were the best and only way that, and Descartes would agree with Locke to this extent, for knowledge of the existence of particular other things, like, I don't know, again, here's my teacup, or here's the rest for the teacup. How would you know that? The best and only way you can know those things, Descartes and Locke would agree, is through, if you could know them at all, the best and only judge of existence is sense perception. But Descartes might say, look, maybe it's the best and only judge, but that doesn't mean it's a very good judge. In the end, Descartes tells us that it is, but how do we know that, in fact, it's a good enough judge? Is sensory perception a good enough judge of the existence of other particular things, right? Well, Descartes says, yeah, it is because God exists and God made sensory perception work well. But Locke hasn't given us evidence that sensory perception works very well, only that it's the best. So how good is it? Who knows? This argument doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us that sensory perception is good enough to be trusted. Maybe it's the best judge, but it's a pretty bad judge, and so we should ignore it. Well, at least this argument we at least need to know how good it is. Is it good enough for knowledge? Okay, so Locke has a second argument that sensation succeeds at its important goal. So let's take a look at that argument. So Locke says, and this is at the very end of the reading, that the goal of sensation is what? It's to inform us about attaining the good and avoiding the evil caused by those other things. And so he gives examples having to do with flame. He says, look, sensation teaches us that if you stick your hand in a flame, it's going to hurt, and it does a good job of letting us know which actions are going to lead to pain and which are not. So sensation does a good job of teaching us, like, okay, if I tried to eat this, like put it in my mouth and crunch, wouldn't go so very well, but if I tried to eat, a cookie, that would go well. So sensation, Locke says, the goal of sensation is to tell us about which actions, when we perform them, will produce pleasant experiences, and which actions, when we perform them, will produce painful experiences, and then using that knowledge of what will happen if we do different things, what experiences we'll have if we do different things, we can then act in accordance with that knowledge. So the goal of sensation is to help us navigate the world and to help us avoid pain and get pleasure by telling us which actions will produce pleasure and which actions will produce pain. And Locke says that, hey, sensation actually does a good job. It does a good job about telling us which actions will produce pleasure and which will produce pain, right? We, in fact, do know that if you stick your hand in a fire, it will hurt. If you eat a cookie, it will taste good. So sensation does give us a lot of information about how sensation will change, and in particular about which actions will produce pleasant outcomes and which will produce painful outcomes. Now, there was actually a Hume, another empiricist, Hume, who we talked about before, who came after Locke, who said, actually, maybe it's more complicated than that, but we're not going to worry about that. If we give these two if we then assume these two premises are correct, then we can conclude sensation achieves its goal, right? What is its goal? Help us navigate the world, and in terms of avoiding pain and getting and achieving pleasure, and it helps us do that. And so Locke says we should trust sensation, and we will have certain knowledge if we do so. Or the third premise is we should trust sensation, and we'll have knowledge, in particular certain knowledge, by trusting sensation if sensation achieves its goal. If sensation is good at whatever its goal may be, then when we trust it, we have certain knowledge. Well, if sensation does achieve its goal, then we should trust sensation. So Locke's picture is, look, here we are, we have sensation, we're wandering around in some world that we don't otherwise really know a whole lot about, and we have this way of apparently finding out about it that at least does a good job of telling us about whether or not, doing something is going to hurt or help, and if it does a good job of telling us what's going to help and what's going to hurt, we should trust it, and it does provide us with certain knowledge. That's the picture. It's not crazy. But I think if we're Descartes, we might worry about this. And in particular, we might worry about the third premise. I think Descartes might very well agree that, whether or not I'm being deceived by an evil demon, the world that I'm encountering in sensation is at least regular and proceeds in predictable ways, and sensation teaches me how that world proceeds. Even if I don't know what's causing the sensations, I can know that, if I stick my hand in what looks like a fire, it will hurt. If I seem to put in my mouth what looks like a cookie, then I will feel good. So sensation has these regular patterns, and we can figure out what they are, and in that way sensation helps us to get to pleasure and avoid pain. But does that mean we should believe that it's accurate about everything, right? So we can ask, what is it exactly that sensation provides us with certainty about? And we might think, actually sensation does provide us with certainty about the good and evil that are caused by other things. So we know that if we engage in certain actions, we can be very certain, very confident that certain pleasant or unpleasant results will come about. We don't know everything about what will cause pleasure and what will cause pain, but sensation teaches us a lot, and we should trust that. But we might wonder, does sensation really provide us with certainty about those other things that are out there causing the pleasure and the pain? We could say, look, I know that when it looks to me like there's a cookie, whether or not there is a cookie, if I eat it, or if I do what I think is eating it, assuming I have a body, then I will experience pleasure. And if I put what seems to me to be my hand in what seems to be a fire, then I will experience pain. But is there really a fire? Do I really have a hand? Is there really a cookie? Am I really eating it? Maybe, I don't know, right? Maybe you might think, look, we could treat sensation as a useful fiction. So it does it, if we trust in sensation, we can be pretty confident about which actions are going to produce pleasure and which actions are going to produce pain. But we don't actually know why those different actions are going to produce pleasure and other actions are going to produce pain. Sensation gives us a story. It says, oh, there's a cookie, or oh, there's a fire. Maybe that story that sensation is giving us is true. Maybe it's not. But maybe what we know is that, look, it's a useful fiction. So we know certain patterns of experience will happen if we do different things. We don't know why those patterns of experience are going to evolve as they do. We don't know what's really going on in the world, but we can trust that they will evolve in certain ways. And so we'll trust sensation not to actually be correct about those things that are causing the sensations. We'll just trust it to be correct in telling us how our experiences are going to evolve. And so when we sense, Descartes might think, we shouldn't believe in other things, we should just believe in their effects on us. We should believe, I don't know that I have this experience of a cookie, and I don't actually know what's out there, but I know that when I have that experience and I act in a certain way, I'll have pleasurable sensations. But I don't actually know if there's a cookie or not out there. I can't be certain of that. So I think Descartes would say, yes, Locke is right that we should trust sensation for action, and we should trust sensation about how our experience evolves, but that doesn't mean that it actually tells us what, that doesn't mean we should trust it for giving us an accurate account of what the world is really like. It does because God's not a deceiver, but that's not a move that Locke makes. And so Descartes would say, isn't knowledge. And so we have two views of why we can trust much of sensation. For Descartes, the reason we can trust much of sensation is because God is not a deceiver. For Locke, the answer is that because sensation is right about which actions will produce pleasure and pain. For Descartes, the worry is, have you really established that God is not a deceiver? And in particular, have you established that God is not a deceiver in light of the fact that maybe an evil demon, an evil genius is trying to deceive you? For Locke, the question is, okay, yeah, maybe sensation is right about which actions will produce pleasure and pain, but why should we believe anything else? Why should we trust sensation in any other way and think that we're learning about what the world is actually like beyond what effects it has on us? So we might worry that neither of these are very satisfactory views, and then we might worry, then why should I trust sensation? So I will leave it to you to think about how can we know that our basic methods of knowing are any good. Locke and Descartes try to give us different answers, and we might find them satisfactory, or we might not. And so I'll let you think about what you think, how satisfactory you think their different answers are, and if they're unsatisfactory, what we might say instead. So let's wrap up this module, our second and last module, on epistemology, or theory of knowledge. A priori knowledge, that will be knowledge that does not rely on sensation, and that is, for example, acquired by inspecting accurate ideas that God has installed on us, or in some other way. Rationalism, there is important a priori knowledge, or in ethics that reason plays an important role in making us valuable, or understanding what's valuable, or motivating us. In empiricism, in epistemology, there is not important a priori knowledge, that sensation doesn't need supplementation with reason to provide us, for example, knowledge of the world. So Descartes thinks lots is known by reason. I exist. God exists is not a deceiver. I can trust the innate ideas, the ideas that God has implanted in me, and I can trust sensation, again, because God is not a deceiver, and all of that is going to allow me to go out and do physics and discover the nature of the universe, and all sorts of other sciences. Locke, on the other hand, is an empiricist, and so he thinks that sensation provides knowledge of other things. Why? Because it provides us its goal. It reaches its goal of providing us knowledge about the good and evil that those other things cause. And we can therefore rely on it, again, in doing science and learning about the way the world really is. There's much more to say about theory of knowledge, about epistemology, about our connection to the world, how we know or how we don't know, how confident we should be or not. This is a little bit of a taste of what that investigation looks like.